Trying to bring out my Stewie voice, and I don't know where Brian is right now.
Okay, that's the horn one. Okay. I couldn't remember. I was like, okay, we got the funky one, which is, A, and then the other one is kind of like a drop transfer
Right.
thing.
And we'll be right back with you, brought to you by...
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Part two here with the silent professional, continuing on from our previous conversation from earlier with the main topic being discipline. We spoke about quite a bit so far over the last hour. Continuing on, one of the last things that we had discussed was discussing the difference in between requirements and expectations, and hit a few topics as far as the different correlation of these two words and the difference in between the two of them. One could be relationships, and then also continuing further as far as employment.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Did you want to just kind of run through the difference in between requirements and expectations and how they can vary specifically from a employment perspective?
Certainly. So, before we went to our short little break, I talked about requirements and expectations. I gave examples of employment, and I also gave examples of relationships. So I touched base on the relationship aspect a little bit more than the employment thing. But I am a person that genuinely believes that the word expectation does not do people justice in a professional work environment. Expectations, we all have them, but most of the time they always evolve, and not everybody's going to be able to meet your specific expectation. When you use the word require, that means what is necessary, what is mandated, what is directed, what is ordered in order for certain activities to take place. Oh yeah, we're getting a whole bunch of coffee machines.
Coffee grounds.
Like I said, I am not a fan of expectations as opposed to requirements, because requirements tell a professional, a worker, or anybody in general that's a part of an organization or group what they need to do in order to effectively do their job. A lot of upper level management will throw around, well, the expectation is... And well, just because you expect it doesn't mean that you require it. So I feel like the narrative, the language should be clarified in a requirement as opposed to an expectation. It can often get very confusing because you have people that like to do wordplay to get themselves into a certain task or out of a certain task. And when you do this, it's all based on how you use the words. But if you use the word I require you to do A, B, C, X, Y, Z, then there is no degrees for variation, because that is an absolute, as opposed to, well, I expect you to do it, but I didn't say I was requiring.
And I think the biggest thing that defines in between the two is, obviously having that open communication ahead of time. That way, I guess after the fact, there's no grievance, there's no hurt feelings, there's no disappointment panda, if you want to call it that, in regards to not only being able to set yourself either up for success or failure if things weren't immediately communicated on what was required or what the individual, your boss, your significant other, a friend, on what was expected of the person, but it was never said. It was just expected, and again, due to either lack of communication, information that could have been at the time, then obviously it may not be necessarily a specific fault of either party, but still taking that initiative to have open communication. That way, questions of whatever the task was to be asked before anything is even done. That way, you're not only valuing your own time, but the other person's time, just strictly from a efficiency standpoint.
Absolutely.
Out of curiosity, do you have your phone on you?
I do.
Do you still have that article, either from the pennyhoarder or the other one? And if not, I can send it to you real quick.
Oh, I think I can manage this.
While he's locating that, there was a article that I actually had originally found and I had sent to the silent professional. It was initially from the pennyhoarder, And again, I don't use this site. It's a kind of a social media news site. I don't really know, or I'm not very familiar with the legitimacy of the site, which is why I initially sent it to the silent professional. That way we could actually discuss it. And the link I'll drop down actually in the description. That way you can review it from yourself. I have the silent professional actually looking up the previous site, and he will give the actual information on where he found that, and then we can begin to have this discussion as far as the military was offering sign-on bonuses specifically for particular jobs or terms of enlistment.
Yes. So I was able to pull up that article, and basically, this is from the source Pennyhoarder. And the article is entitled Enlist Now and You Could Get Up to a $50,000 Army Signing Bonus. Now, let's talk about what this entails. I'll read the first sentence from the article. The U.S. Army announced that it will pay up to $50,000 to its largest bonus ever to recruits who qualify and sign on for a 6-year active duty enlistment. So there is a catch, and it's all wordplay right here. They said we'll pay up to, so it doesn't mean that you're guaranteed to get $50,000. You can get anywhere between $0 to $50,000, and you have to sign on for a 6-year active duty enlistment.
Now, real quick, and this may be something that you don't know, and that's okay, but for the average person that's enlisting to the military, which term do most people enlist for just initially off the bat? Do you know, or?
Yes, so there's degrees of variations, and ultimately, most people have the common idea of a 4-year enlistment with the military. That's usually what's been put out on media, movies, and whatnot. And then people that have family members that are veterans, they're used to the 4-year enlistment. But ultimately, the military has difference in contracts. So you can have a 2-year contract, a 4-year contract. Well, actually, you can have a 3-year contract, 4-year contract, 6-year contract, and an 8-year contract. This is based on your military occupational specialty, also known as the MOS. And so it depends on your training, your educational, and your knowledge, skills, and abilities for that particular career field, what's going to guide if you can get the bonus or not. Also, there's a test called the ASVAB, and it's basically an aptitude test to see where you're proficient at. And if you score high, essentially what most people look for, and I'm not sure what this stands for, but GT score. It's if you have a high GT score, then it opens the pathway to getting into many jobs.
Now, just reviewing the specific MOS jobs that are listed on there, can you actually read those off for me, please?
Certainly. Let me see. There was another site that you.
I believe the other one that either you found was it military.com or which?
It was goarmy.com. Yes.
Okay, goarmy.com.
Okay. So, non-prior service Army Reserve enlistment bonuses. So this is for reserves, but some of this stuff will translate to active duty. So let me explain the difference between active duty, reserves, and National Guard. So active duty is where their job is to be in uniform every day, 24/7, and they're doing their job for the military. Reservists and National Guard members, they have a 6 to 8 year commitment, depending upon the contract they sign, because they're not active reserves. They're not doing active work in the military. So usually it's going to be 2 weekends a month and X amount of weeks per year, and that's what builds up their status for them. Now, moving into some of the jobs that can give you like an enlistment bonus. Here's a list of them. You have a bridge crew member, a power distribution specialist, technical engineer, air traffic control operator, intermittent reenlistment specialist, geospatial intelligence imagery analyst, human intelligence collector, cryptologic linguist, military intelligence systems maintainer and integrator, psychological operations specialist, orthopedic specialist, eye specialist, cargo specialist, petroleum laboratory specialist, parachute rigger, I should be able to pronounce that, and then water treatment specialist.
Now, in regards to that last one, the water treatment specialist, there used to be a movie back in the 90s called In the Army Now with Pauly Shore and Andy Dick. Do you remember that movie?
I do.
In that movie, specifically for some of our listeners, depending upon which generation that you come from, In the Army Now is basically a movie in regards to we have kind of two old school hairband rocker kind of bum kids going through high school that more or less get taken advantage of when they go into an enlistment office, and they are persuaded. And I think this film, I think, would actually offer a really good discussion as far as, you know, its accuracy. And I'm not saying necessarily enlistment officers or the individuals or work at the enlistment office say anything in a positive or, you know, negative light when they're talking about the military. It all boils down to, you know, the types of people. I don't necessarily blame a specific job for doing it, but in the movie they're basically convinced that water treatment specialists, it's a good job, you won't go combat or anything like that. And then next thing you know, war breaks out and these two pups are in combat trying to do that job, the water treatment specialist, and understanding, I guess, the amount of tense labor, as well as, I guess, one of the things that civilians take for granted when they're going out in the world is, in most cases or most places in America, it's very safe to drink tap water compared to other places in the world, and just being able to turn on the faucet and have clean water that you can shower with, that you can drink with. You know, in some places it may have more or less chlorine or more mineral or less mineral content to it.
Yes.
But for all intents and purposes, it's not going to give you diarrhea or kill you in most places in America, I would say. And given if there are those places in America, just because if it's a smaller town and let's say you have well water, or you have to get your water other ways. I'm not necessarily speaking about those locations. It's more so if you're hooked up to the city plan and then these services being actually offered either through your metropolitan utilities district and being able to do that. So I would assume, as far as the functionality of the military, especially in a combat situation, being able to provide your military units with something as necessary as drinking water, whether it's to drink with, shower with, to cook with, especially in combat. And these guys are, was it Desert Storm or?
They were in Desert Storm.
So understanding, we have these two guys that are basically represented as the delinquents of society being put into a necessary personnel position during a combat scenario. Not only, I guess, the delusions of grandeur of what was expected they would need to do with that job, and then also the social pressure as well as the pressure of the job with having a whole military battalion being upset with them because they're unable to perform at what is considered the standard military requirements of providing safe, drinkable water to everyone while in combat.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, first things first. So I'm going to say this as a disclaimer. When you join the military, no matter what branch, you might have a specific job detail, but first and foremost, you're at the needs of whatever that branch needs you for at that time. So a lot of people get it confused that, well, I'm only supposed to be doing this. Well, everybody receives basic combat training, hand-to-hand training, marksmanship training. So with that being said, at any given time, you might have to do your job as a soldier as opposed to what your occupational specialty is. And those two individuals in the movie, yes, they were society's ups that had no real expectation of what was going on because they didn't know what they were getting themselves into. And essentially, yes, like if you don't perform a certain function in the military associated with your job, yes, you're going to have a lot of pissed off individuals at you. And it will be a very difficult time for you to adapt and overcome that situation until you get your stuff straight, as I like to say.
Yeah, I definitely would like to have a discussion or possibly do a reaction into that movie. Maybe I'll either see if I can find a DVD version of this and then we'll set it up. And then it'll not only hopefully bring, I think by watching it, it'll actually bring up some really good questions. And kind of what I'm expecting to come up is mainly questions of either accuracy as far as if military standard procedure, or even at that time during Desert Storm, did follow. Like, obviously procedures change over time, especially with the needs of the military, not only at that time but also now, may require either individuals as a whole or just whatever standard procedure would be at that time. I think it would be really good to watch. And again, since it is a movie, it's not required that it has 100% accuracy, and I think for a lot of times they do embellish those certain things as far as whether it's for the purposes of comedy, or I'm sure there are situations, while it may not be, I guess, accurate for military procedure, for individuals that have served, they could say, yeah, that definitely did happen, or that particular scenario did happen, and then just generate some very interesting, I guess, conversation. So,
Absolutely. I mean, most military movies, either they're going through the process of starting up in the military and then evolving to a certain point as a soldier or airman or whatever your respective branch is, or they go from a serious standpoint to depict certain things about the military in terms of historical aspects of things. Nobody is ever going to get it 100% right because history, as we know it, there's always different sides to history that we may or may not know. He who writes the book is he who has the money to put out history the way that he or she sees fit in today's society. But is it actually the accurate depiction of history? Well, you're never going to know unless you start speaking with people that were actually there. Perceptions, attitudes, and viewpoints are always going to be slightly a bit different than what you expect. But I find that the worth in learning insight from people is more valuable than what's written in a history book. And the reason why I say, do you always want to go with the person that quote unquote historically won a war or a conflict? I also feel like the people that were on the opposite end of the conflict, the losing end of the conflict, if there is a losing end, because in war, in my opinion, there's no winners or losers. There's more of destruction and destitution and a whole bunch of things that people of everyday life should not have to endure. And so, with that being said, ask the people that had to be a part of those activities, not necessarily the military, but the people that were just placed in the middle of all that, trying to live their lives. And I guarantee you'll get a more factual historical value of things and see how that correlates with how events were communicated or perceived based off of history's recordings.